Rome didn't just conquer the world, it crushed it, mercilessly. It didn't just defeat its enemies, it tortured, enslaved, crucified, and erased them. Ever heard of crucifying 6,000 people in one day? Rome did that. Mass crucifixions, starvation sieges, and forced cannibalism. Men condemned for desertion, rebellion, or treason could be stripped naked and hoisted onto a long, sharpened stake, the wood driven slowly through the anus or groin, angled carefully to avoid vital organs. The victim could remain alive for hours, sometimes days, screaming in unimaginable agony while spectators watched in silence or awe. His body was then left upright, twitching and bleeding, as a living warning. But women suffered no less. When female prisoners were accused of aiding revolts, assassinations, or hiding fugitives, they too were impaled, often through the vagina or lower abdomen, the stake exiting through the shoulder or mouth. For the Romans, there was no such thing as gendered mercy. A woman's body was just as usable for punishment. It was supposed to be the greatest uprising Rome had ever faced. Tens of thousands of them, beaten, broken, and chained for years, now armed and angry. Their leader, a former gladiator named Spartacus. Over the next 2 years, Spartacus led an army of enslaved men and women, defeating Roman legions in battle after battle. These weren't trained soldiers, they were the people Rome had tried to forget. But in 71 BCE, the rebellion ended in blood. The final battle was brutal. Spartacus is believed to have died in the chaos, his body never found. But Rome didn't stop at victory. What followed was one of the most terrifying war crimes in ancient history. Crassus ordered that 6,000 captured slaves be crucified not in private, not in secret, but along the Appian Way, the main road from Rome to Capua. That's over 200 kilometers of wooden crosses. One every 30 to 40 meters, each with a human body nailed to it. Alive, screaming, bleeding, dying slowly over days. No burial, no mercy, just a message. Imagine walking that road, for days, smelling rotting flesh, hearing the cries of the dying, watching vultures peck out eyes while soldiers laughed. It wasn't justice, it was terror by design. Rome wanted every slave, every rebel, and every citizen to see those crucified bodies and understand one thing: rebellion will cost you your life, and your dignity. This wasn't just a siege, it was a cataclysm. In 70 CE, the mighty Roman Empire set its sights on Jerusalem, the heart of Jewish resistance during the First Jewish-Roman War. What happened next is considered one of the most horrifying episodes in ancient history. The Roman general Titus, son of Emperor Vespasian, surrounded the city with 4 full legions, cutting off supplies. No food, no clean water, no escape. And then, they waited, like wolves around a wounded deer. Inside the walls, hundreds of thousands of civilians were trapped. What began as fear quickly turned into famine. The city descended into chaos. Mothers watched their children starve. People tore leather from shoes and belts just to boil it for a single mouthful of food. But the worst was yet to come. According to the Jewish historian Josephus, some families were driven mad with hunger. One woman, her name lost to time, roasted her own infant son and ate him. When Roman soldiers heard this story, even they were sickened. But they didn't stop. They tightened the siege even more. Every day, Jewish rebels trying to flee were captured and crucified outside the city walls. Josephus writes that at one point, the Romans were crucifying 500 people a day. The soldiers ran out of wood, so they started reusing crosses. The hills outside Jerusalem looked like a forest of death. And then the final blow. Titus breached the city. What followed was slaughter. Blood filled the streets. Men were stabbed where they stood. Women were dragged into alleys and raped. Children were thrown from rooftops. And the Second Temple, the most sacred site in Judaism, was burned to the ground. The flames devoured not only stone and wood, but a people's identity. The very center of their spiritual life reduced to ash and rubble. Titus paraded back to Rome with thousands of Jewish slaves in chains, sacred relics stolen, and his pockets heavy with stolen gold. He was welcomed as a hero. A triumphal arch still stands in Rome to this day, showing him carrying the menorah from the temple. But the reality of his victory? 1.1 million people dead, 97,000 enslaved. A holy city turned into a graveyard. The siege of Jerusalem wasn't just a military win. It was cultural annihilation. Rome didn't just defeat the Jewish people, it tried to erase them. And it almost did. What do you do when your soldiers run from battle? Most armies would punish them. Rome turned punishment into performance. This was called decimation, a punishment so savage, so psychologically shattering, it broke even hardened warriors. If a Roman legion showed cowardice, mutiny, or insubordination, the entire unit would be assembled. And then, every 10th man would be marked for death, chosen by random lot. No appeals. No trials. Just fate. You could be innocent. You could have fought harder than anyone. It didn't matter. If your name came up, you were going to die. And it wouldn't be by sword or arrow. No. That would be too clean. You'd be beaten to death by your own comrades. With clubs, stones, fists, whatever they had. The men you marched with, ate with, bled with, now forced to crush your skull. Because if they refused, they'd join you. This wasn't punishment, it was psychological torture. It ripped trust apart. It replaced loyalty with fear. You never knew if you'd be next, not for what you did, but for what someone else did. But decimation was just the beginning. Roman commanders had other tools to maintain control. Soldiers accused of desertion were sometimes buried alive, forced into a pit while their comrades shoveled dirt over their struggling bodies. Those caught stealing or striking a superior could be subjected to the fustuarium, a traditional punishment where the unit beats the guilty man to death in silence. No trial, no mercy, just pure, brutal ritual. Cowards could have their right hands chopped off, branded as traitors, and forced to serve in the front ranks without armor, essentially sent to die in the next battle. Some were stripped naked, flogged until their backs were shredded, then paraded through the camp with animal skins sewn onto their flesh, treated not like men, but like beasts. And through it all, Rome called it discipline. They didn't want a loyal army. They wanted an obedient machine fueled by fear, paranoia, and pain. One of the worst cases happened under Crassus during his Parthian campaign. After a failed battle, he decimated entire cohorts, thousands of Roman citizens executed by their own brothers in arms. Morale didn't improve. But no one dared disobey again. So next time someone tells you Roman soldiers were brave, remember, many of them didn't fight because they were loyal. They fought because they were terrified of their own commanders. In Rome's legions, your greatest enemy wasn't always the one in front of you. Sometimes, it was the man standing beside you. The dense, misty forests of Germania were supposed to be the edge of the Roman world, a place the empire could never fully tame. But Rome didn't just try to conquer it, it tried to annihilate it. After the humiliating defeat at the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest in 9 CE, where 3 full Roman legions were slaughtered, Rome was humiliated. Stripped of banners, armor, and honor, the legions were hacked to pieces, and their severed heads were nailed to trees as trophies. Rome wanted revenge. And what followed wasn't warfare, it was systematic destruction. Under generals like Germanicus, the Romans returned with fire in their eyes and blood on their minds. They didn't just defeat tribes, they wiped them out. Entire villages were burned to the ground, crops trampled, wells poisoned, and civilians hunted like animals. Those who weren't killed were enslaved. Those who resisted were tortured. Captured warriors were paraded in chains, then executed in front of their own people. The Romans beheaded tribal leaders and mounted their skulls on pikes outside forts as warnings. And sometimes, just to terrorize, they cut off hands, ears, or genitals, leaving captives to crawl back to their villages as living messages, submit or suffer. Roman soldiers would compete for who could bring back the most enemy heads, literally. These were displayed at camps, stacked like trophies, and even sent back to Rome as proof of loyalty. Tacitus, a Roman historian, admits that the legions desecrated sacred groves, slaughtered priests, and massacred women and children inside temples. The goal wasn't just conquest. It was cultural erasure. The tribes fought back fiercely, and every time they did, the retaliation became more savage. One rebellion. Rome leveled 5 villages. Another. They executed every male above the age of 12. It wasn't battle anymore, it was tribal genocide. Even nature was weaponized. Roman engineers would deliberately cut down ancient forests, not just for tactical reasons, but to destroy the spiritual lifeblood of the Germanic tribes, whose gods lived in trees and rivers. And yet, despite all the brutality, Rome never fully conquered Germania. It remained wild, defiant and soaked in Roman blood. But Rome's legacy there wasn't civilization, it was a trail of burned homes, shattered bones, and nameless graves.